Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our show, Lifestyle with Dr. Movi. This is Dr. Movi, and I am welcoming everybody nationally and internationally to our great program. We're going to discuss lifestyle, especially pertaining to athletes and adolescents or teenagers. It's very, very important because a lot of problems happen if they don't maintain a good, healthy lifestyle, and their body actually is undergoing a lot of changes at that same time. So it's very important to focus on both. So we have great guest tonight. He is actually in charge for training teams for in he's from Australia. So I'll have floor to him. Welcome you, sir. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Dr. Moby. Thanks for taking the time to have me guest on your program. Looking forward to the conversation around athletes and lifestyle today.
Okay. Well, sir, give us a little intro. What do you do there in Australia?
Okay, so I run a basketball program, private academy called Ausswoosh, and basically work with athletes from the age of anywhere from say 8 through to 25. So really working with youth and young people. And basically, I think that you've touched on teenagers and their health, and I see it a lot, that there is a lot of challenges for young people to maintain a healthy lifestyle. And I think it's a relevant topic to be talking with you today.
Okay. So tell us, what age group do you normally deal with?
So I have two academies. So I have the rookies program, which is basically 8 through to 14. And then I have the Ausswoosh Academy, which is actually athletes from 15 through to age 25. But the average age would be, say, 17 to 22. And that's probably where I think the biggest challenges are, because once they reach that certain age of coming out of teenage years into adulthood, they become responsible for their own health, as less so with the younger kids, where their parents are actually have more say in what they eat and how they sleep and all the things that go with them being young and looking after their bodies. Their parents have responsibility for. So really probably from ages 17 through to 24, 25, they're starting a journey of being responsible for their own health.
Oh, great. So tell us, is it any particular game you train, or do you do basically a lot of games?
So basketball, which is somewhere behind me there. So that's the brand. So it is basketball. So the teams that I work with is basketball. I've coached for 30 years here in Australia at various levels. And more recently, in the last 2017, I established Ausswoosh Academy, recognizing that there was a need to help people develop skills. I felt there was a gap for the last decade in what we call body movement fundamentals, which are extremely important. And when we want to reduce injury, so if we look at injury as a topic at the moment, like if you don't teach kids how to move, run, stop, start, those basic footwork fundamentals, then that can lead to injuries later in life. So I recognize that everything we do in sport, whether it be basketball, that our bodies are attached to our feet. And if we don't work on the right parts of our body, the lower part of our body, it can result in serious injuries later in life. So we want to work and teach athletes to reduce those injuries early. So my core focus is on dexterity, body movement fundamentals, sending signals from your brain to your extremities, so that the message that the brain sends allows you to move in such a way that you're not limiting yourself.
Okay, great. So tell us, what are some of the difficulties these teenagers face with their athletic program?
I think the biggest one, and I noticed that you specialize in sleep, and I think it's something that's overlooked from a sporting perspective, is the importance of having, when you talk about a balanced lifestyle. A lot of these kids are juggling, particularly 17 through to say 22. There's huge life changes going on, and one of the things that takes a hit is sleep, because a lot of them, particularly when they're studying for their final year or they're in university, they're spending long hours studying, and or they work shift work, they're trying to juggle study and work, or girlfriends, or partying, which is a sort of a coming of age thing that we all tend to go through when we're younger. Is this, experiencing socializing, because now we're in the outside world on our own. It's how we test those boundaries. And I think and then you got situations where they have to get up early to go to uni because they're traveling, or they might be getting up early for work because they're in trades, and a lot of tradies here, we call tradies, like plumbers, mechanics, and that start really early. So it's a hit to their system. But where that impacts their sport is obviously if they're tired and they're not getting good sleep, then their decision making can wane, and that results in injury again. So it's the importance of sleep. So I think that is the biggest one, that they fatigue. And then there's over exertion. So there's what we call load management, that they don't manage their workload very well, and they'll do more than they need to because they love the sport, or whichever sport they may play, in my case, basketball. Mm-hmm. And they'll love it to the point that they just do it all the time. And then their body becomes fatigued, and that's again where it can affect their lifestyle and cause risks of injuries and other factors.
So tell us also, and that's actually a very important point you, I think, emphasized, that's the sleep. So, most of teenagers, I say, at least should sleep 9+ hours. The other thing is they have this delayed phase. Some have, the body is going through changes, as you know. The clock, the body clock actually has everybody's tendency to kind of move forward, even for us. But for teenagers, it really drifts very fast. So if they are up all night, they can do it very quickly. But problem is that they can't go back. The brain kind of is wired in a way that if we want to sleep 8 o'clock, it won't happen. But if we want to stay till 1 o'clock, it can happen very easily. There's how the brain is wired. But for them, since their tendency is so high, they have to be really careful. The other problem I see is when they get up in the morning. So in US, we tried to experiment this thing, delayed opening the school in the morning. So by 1 hour, that improved the grades. Do you see same thing in sports? Like if you change the training time to a little bit later, would that make a difference?
I haven't done tests myself or seen any analytics around that, but it would make sense, particularly with the age groups that I'm working with, because I know when I was younger, I'd sleep till 1 p.m. in the afternoon, but I might go to bed at 1 a.m., and that's, I think a lot of us do that. And I know my parents would complain, go, gee, you sleep half the day's gone. But I don't think people recognize that as a young person, and you obviously understand this, so you study, is that's normal. That as you go through those changes and you're a teenager, your sleep patterns see you sleeping more and more. Now, there are questions as to whether more sleep's a good thing, because there is obviously a healthy balance and a more diminishing returns when it comes to sleep and things like that. But at a certain age, it's sort of, again, another thing that we all tend to experience, that like teenagers like to sleep, and it's because they need that sleep. And I think that I haven't seen any research around your question, but I do think one of the things that people have to understand is, and youth in particular, regardless of their sport, or actually people in general, is sleep is where our body does its repair work. And that is what the purpose of sleep is. It's where our body is shutting down all its systems so that our work, so our body can actually repair itself. And you may be able to speak more to that than I can, but it's extremely important. And I think it's emphasized in a lot of sports, is that kids need to get their sleep.
Yeah, and that speaks volume here. Even in US, we had certain teams playing NFL or football. They were playing in a different time zone. Actually, in England, so they would fly from here to England, but they were trying to train with some sleep doctors, and trying to train them 1 or 2 weeks prior to that. So by the time they arrive in England, their body is not really also already used to all their time zones. You have a great point. I mean, I love that you started with sleep. Is not just as sleep specialist, but it's also so important, because a lot of athletes actually need rejuvenation physically. There's a physical aspect as well as emotional and not to mention your mindset. Is playing game is all about both balance, right? You just can't just be physically fit and just make wrong decisions and just end up injuring yourself or somebody else, right?
That's correct. And I think that's another fact you just hit on there. You do risk, if you're not, with it in the sense of mental capacity is not there because you're fatigued, you actually increase the chances that you may well injure someone else. So it's actually one of those things that you have to be conscious of, that the way you live your life as an athlete can impact others and even potentially their career if you make a poor decision in a game that actually results in the injury of someone else because you weren't alert to things because you hadn't been doing. But it's something that at the age I'm working with, I'm very conscious of. I'm actually moving my training session from early morning, which I do, and I always say that's character building. I actually have my athletes think that because I have them come in at 8 a.m. and work till 9:30 on a Saturday and a Sunday, that they believe that they don't like that because they don't get their sleep. So my older group, I'm actually had a survey recently, and I've asked them, would they train, would they prefer a Sunday afternoon, 5 to 6:30 p.m. And interestingly, I haven't had one person say no to that. So it demonstrates that they don't necessarily want the early morning training, and they did and can bitch about it, if I could use that terminology. And at the end of the day, it's I understand that they don't want, they're not turning up. That's why I'm changing, is some of them aren't showing up after 3 or 4 years. I'm battling to get them there, and that I do believe is part of it, is they're fatigued and they want to sleep.
Yeah, what I have seen, I also worked with Department of Defense before, and we had soldiers, and they would make them come for training early morning. They would, and unfortunately, some of the high command actually got pissed off because I made recommendation to let them sleep extra hour because they had problem. So I said, yes, you need to accommodate people. Yes, don't take them, they are lazy, but think in terms of it's actual problem, it's a disease. Unfortunately, sleep problems, you can't fix it in 1 week. It takes a couple of weeks or months for to readjust things. Another thing is competitive sports. So the other thing I want to discuss with you is nutrition. So where do you see that's a big problem here in US? Tell me, what's your experience there in Down Under?
I'm certainly not a nutritionist, but look, there's things that because I'm not a nutritionist, we have tournaments, and I know in the US there's a lot of AAU tournaments, particularly with basketball and things like that, those situations are different. They need to be managed differently when it comes to nutrition. So what I tend to do is I tend to give my athletes, before a tournament, I will submit to them a document that's produced here in Australia that actually tells them how they should manage eating throughout a tournament to ensure that they're replenishing the nutrients that they're losing, particularly staying hydrated, which is extremely important. When to eat is another issue. Don't eat just before a game, couple of hours before a game, and eating the correct food. So carbohydrate loading before and after, eating protein or getting some protein to help replenish the muscles after play, within the first couple of hours within a window, but then not overdoing it neither. And watching what you consume. Like, one of the things that, marketing's done well is promote the sports drinks. And while they're designed to be taken in sips, a lot of athletes will scull those sorts of drinks. The best thing they can drink, which we know, is actually water. But those do offer value if they're, consumed the correct way, the sports drinks, because they do replenish things that the body has lost, but not to the point that they become a beverage that's just consumed without purpose. And I think that's the misleading thing with the diet type or the nutritional drinks and things that we have. And then there's questions around, some people consume the wrong stuff. So they'll go and consume an energy drink high in caffeine or something like that. While they feel that improves their cognitive abilities on the floor or something like that, or in whatever sport they do, because it's giving them a bit more hyper focus, having the caffeine. It actually isn't the best thing to have before actual competition, because it does other things. It can and has been known to like shrink the veins in the brain and things like that. So oxygen flow can be affected and other things like that. So yeah, what you consume, they say you are what you eat. It's a cliche, but in athletics, looking after your diet is absolutely important, and it's neglected. I think I like to refer to the mind side of things, so, which includes sleep, as the mental muscle. I think it's not trained enough. I don't think we focus on our athletes and their mind and mindfulness and concepts like meditation. And I have a couple of my athletes choose to do yoga, and they think it's one of the best things that they've ever done in their life, and they've made it part of their training regime. There's cognitive relaxation therapy, like self-hypnosis, I guess, and relaxation therapies that they can do that help them be in the moment and focus on their bodies to help their bodies relax. And I think that both diet and what I call the mental muscle are highly neglected.
Yeah, it's a great point, because you said if they take caffeine, and caffeine is a very strong stimulant, and you already have too much adrenaline in your system, you're already in a fight mode. So what more you will gain by taking more caffeine, except getting nervous or making wrong decisions, or because those are, you need to calm yourself, calm it down, not make it worse. So I think it's a great point. If people are trying to do yoga or some kind of relaxation in between, and that's definitely, I think it's a great approach, because that's what. Also, one of my favorite topic is, a lot of people and teenagers, they're into building muscles and so forth. And I tell that, I'll get your view on it, and I'll then give my take on it. So where do you see, is it good to beef you up, or just kind of lean and perfect is the way to go?
I think different sports, it varies because they have different requirements. But if you look at the components of fitness, I think that none of them suggest that you need to have a bulk body, meaning, you've got agility, flexibility, what are the others? Endurance, strength, power. There's others, but they're the core ones that you teach and train as a coach. I think that what we teach, or what I've always taught, is body weight resistance. So push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, anything that involves that is relatively good at a young age. So I've heard strength and conditioning coaches that argue that doing any sort of free weight lifting at a young age can be detrimental to growth and things like that. But I've heard others say there's no evidence of that. So that's very confusing from the advice I would present to someone. But what I think is the safest bet for young athletes growing is body weight resistance, or lightweight resistance, meaning they're doing body weight resistance, but they may well have a weight around their waist or on their back. I don't encourage people to train with any weight. So years ago you'd see people with ankle weights that can increase injury, because that's not natural to be carrying that weight while playing. So you see people with weight belts and silly things like that. I think that they're like, because then when they take them off, the argument is they can jump higher and things like that. I think you're better off practicing and learning to jump, under the instruction of someone who knows how to teach jumping. Particularly in basketball, is I think that I certainly don't teach jumping to anyone in the sense of technique, but landing is an issue with. I have a couple of athletes that can jump very well, but they don't land very well, and it's quite scary because they haven't learned how to land, and I can't teach them that, unfortunately. But they need to, understand that those aspects of training are important as well, which is probably, again, body movement fundamentals. How do you land safely when you jump high in the air? So I'm sure if you were speaking to a high jump coach or an athletics coach who teaches long jump, those sorts of things, I'm sure they'd have those answers. But basketball seems to be neglected. Maybe that's a prompt for me to find out. So
yeah. Also, tell me, is in basketball? I mean, I haven't played much except a couple of games. Is it? I know people talk always about height, and people have advantage because it's also, of course, is your technique. So you can be average height and still be a good player, or there has to be a lot with height.
I think it's like superheroes. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and I don't see I think anyone can play the game as long as they've got attributes that may give them an advantage over someone else. Like a lot of taller players don't have the speed of a smaller player, but then height can be seen as an advantage, but it can also be a disadvantage in that the way that a taller player shoots the ball isn't necessarily the same as someone who is shorter, that they may have more range in their shot. And we see that it's improving with athletes across the world taking perimeter shots, particularly taller players. But taller players are renowned for struggling with free throws and things like that. And the angle in which the ball enters the hoop is extremely important. And when you're changing the biomechanics of a shooter, meaning they're not built the same, they're shooting differently. Those guys that are slightly taller don't necessarily shoot the shot. Their biomechanics won't shoot the ball at the same trajectory as someone who may well be shorter, which requires a higher arc. So that's why we see a lot more missing further out by bigger athletes. And I think that sort of height and small things, everyone's relevant to the game. And one of the things that I have seen I've been coaching 30 years, so the last 10 years more so, I've seen what we call versatility coming into the game and adaptability. And that's where athletes who used to traditionally be told to stand under the basket because they're tall are now actually being told they can shoot at the perimeter. And you have smaller players that would never go into post up, what we call post up, go inside to take a move or make a move on their player, are now being able to do that, particularly because the bigger guys are stepping out to the perimeter, which frees up them to then do post moves as well. So we're seeing a transition, and have over probably the last 10 to 15 years, of athletes who are starting to develop all the skills required to play all sort of positions. So we sort of have this movement towards what we call positionless basketball, whereas prior everyone had a role. These days, it seems like anyone can play any spot on the floor, that roles have become less relevant.
Tell me, who is your favorite player?
Oh, it's look, I grew up with Michael Jordan, but I think there's a lot of great players. So there's this big argument in basketball around who's what they call the GOAT, the greatest of all time. And, all the common names like Kobe and LeBron and, big names, I guess, come up, Will Chamberlain and guys like that. I say there's a herd of GOATs. So I find it very hard to actually pick any individual. I think it's an insult to suggest that anyone is the greatest of all time when, as I just described, all the players over the course of at least the recorded history of professional basketball, particularly in the US, those athletes are all within their own right played a different style of game. So, I think the argument of who the greatest of all time probably should come down to who was the best point guard of all time, or who was the best shooter of all time, or I think that's easier to decide, or who was the best center of all time, or to date, So yeah, I struggle to pick any one player, but I don't tend to get starstruck by anyone. But I do think the one person I'd probably get starstruck by if he was in a room with me would possibly be Michael Jordan. So I'd have to go with the crowd and say, yeah, Michael Jordan.
Okay, right. Great. Hey, also tell me, I'm always big fan. I don't know if you remember, great teams actually originated from Australia, whether it was cricket, hockey, field hockey, or any. And at one time we were thinking, what Australia is doing? They always produce perfect players. And I'm big. I'm from Pakistan, so we used to follow cricket. And I say your players were phenomenal, great ballers, great strength. And I said, wow, they really invest a lot into sports. So why is that most Australians are really into more really great players in a lot of sports, not only in basketball? Or
I think that's a really good question, because for our number of population, we do tend to do quite well in sport and team sport. And I think it comes down to our environment. Our environment gives us the opportunity to play sport all year round, because we do have wonderful weather here. I'm not sure if you've ever been to Australia, but it is a dry country, but a good amount of, the reason we live on mostly the eastern seaboard and the West does have its coastal city in Perth, which actually wins. Interestingly, I'll just come back to it, so I'll divert. The Perth Wildcats are our National Basketball League champions, and they win it quite a bit. I think they've won it 10 times in the last 15 years, something ridiculous, whatever it is. And they're 4 hours difference from the East Coast. And when they're in the finals, the teams have to, and they do like a series similar to the NBA. I think it's best of 5 games. The teams have to fly back and forth, this 4-hour trip. And there's a big argument that the reason they continue to win is around fatigue and is around the time difference. And that the last team, I think, or the last couple of years, teams have flown into that city like 2 weeks prior to try and, or a couple of days at least prior, to make sure that they're not getting that delay of between games, because it's like every second game they'll play a game. Now in the US, the NBA is probably used to that. The athletes used to flying distances to play teams and things like that. But to come back to your original question around actual the team sport stuff is we have what we call a club-based system here, which is highly driven by volunteers, parents and coaches who volunteer their time to benefit the kids. I run a private academy, but prior to that, I'd been heavily involved in what we call the association structure here, which is similar to the AAU, probably less so in that it's organisations build up and they run their own competitions, domestic comps, and they play what we call representative. And same with cricket, and we have AFL and football, or soccer as it's known here, and all these different codes. And we do have hockey, cricket, obviously. That's something I said that. So there is this whole thing around, that the community. It's a community-based sporting structure that we have out here. We don't have it in our school systems. We do have schools. I work in schools, and they do highly competitive, and I do work in those environments. But the core of our sport is played on weekends and is run by families and mums and dads just giving their time to help kids participate.
Okay, well, it was a great talk, and thank you for enlightening us with all that thoughts. So give us your final thoughts, and then we'll just wrap it up. So
I think from what we've discussed today, I think that the importance of looking after yourself as an athlete is a priority when it comes to sleep and also diet. And while I said I'm not a dietitian, I'd encourage people to go looking for that information around what's required to eat healthy and eat correctly, and look at the things that you wouldn't normally do. There's a saying, what you do over and above what everyone else does makes you a better player and or person. So if you see that there's opportunities like getting more sleep that could give you an edge over someone else, or eating correctly could give you an edge over another opponent on the sporting field, then why would you not work on that aspect of your game? Because it actually is part of your game. I think we have this habit of looking after our, those core components of fitness that I mentioned. But if you don't live a healthy lifestyle, you run the risk of not being the complete athlete that is possible for you.
Yeah. So it was such a great honor to listen to you and to learn from you. So I would just conclude that make sure whatever you play, make sure stay safe. It's not about just winning game. It's also after that you want to enjoy your life. You don't want to get injured, and do not use any drugs to enhance your performance, because it's going to really take a big toll. A lot of people have died, unfortunately, because of those drugs. So stay safe and be healthy, and keep watching our show. Give us feedback, and thank you for taking.
Thanks, Dr. Bobby, and thanks to your audience. And I hope you guys do well with the helping people improve their lifestyle. Take care.
Thank you.